Welcome to Dalton Draws, the series where the title tells you exactly what the show is. On today's episode, I want to reflect on my time in Pokémon Violet. I'll be drawing the main cast of characters, as well as all of the Pokémon I used on my journey. So, let's get started. In pretty much every Pokémon game, I pick the Water Starter. I wouldn't necessarily say it's my favorite type of Pokémon, but a lot of Water Starters are blue, and, well, that's my favorite color. It's not much deeper than that. Some of my favorite Pokémon of all time have been the Water Starters, like Totodile or Greninja. This generation had some of my favorite starter designs in years, and I was honestly split between Quaxly and Fuecoco. I mean, one is a stylish duck, and the other is this goofball. It's a tough choice. Ultimately, I chose to go with Quaxly, which I nicknamed Wave Rider. Fuecoco may have given me some real Totodile vibes, but the last time I opted not to go with the water type, it was the generation that gave us Greninja, aka my second favorite Pokemon. Well, third, technically. Ash Greninja is my second favorite. Anyways, I usually try to pick the water type, and I liked Quaxly enough that I wanted to see what it evolved into. I usually try to avoid learning the final evolutions beforehand, because to me, that takes away from the experience. I like the surprise of seeing what my partner becomes over the course of the journey. But hey, the journey's just starting, so let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. On the first route, I found this little guy, Shrood. I nicknamed it Luigi, for a few reasons. It's kinda green and it has a big nose, but the real reason is much dumber than that. See, in Fortune Street for the Wii, Luigi is described as being, and I quote, shrewd and powerful. Not really how I'd describe Luigi, but hey, maybe Shrood is shrewd and powerful. It wasn't. Luigi left my team very early on. Around this same time, I also found a LeChunk, or as I nicknamed it, LeChungus. Shortly after catching this absolute unit, I got myself into a bit of trouble. See, there's this ledge outside of Los Platos, and if you cross that gap, the Pokemon there are all over level 20, way above what I would have had at the time. But there were Pokemon on the other side that I wanted to catch. So I threw one of my Pokemon over the gap to start a battle, and the game repositioned me to be on that ledge. So I took the opportunity, looked around, caught a few Pokemon, but I ended up having to bail out of there pretty quickly. I didn't have enough healing items, and all of my Pokemon were way underleveled for this. So yeah, I booked it back to town. After that, I decided to follow along the main story. I went to Mesa Goza and began the treasure hunt. But before I truly began the treasure hunt, I wanted to look around a bit more, so I went back south to look for more Pokemon and explore areas that I had just passed by initially. While I was there, I stopped to take a selfie, and while I was trying to figure out how the camera worked on my Rotom phone, this little Fidough just walked up behind me and got in the shot. After a moment like that, I wasn't going to just leave it behind. So, that's how Foto joined my team. It was one of the most memorable moments of my adventure, and it happened so early on. Continuing south, I found this sort of marsh area, and that was where I ended up finding this Flamingo. Or should I say, Flamigo, or as I nicknamed it, Flamongus. I tend to be a fan of the Pokemon designs that are just like real animals, and I mean, come on, that's just a flamingo. I love it. I'm not trying to jump around in this adventure too much, but for a good chunk of the time, Flamongus would prove to be one of my most powerful allies. This thing was just annihilating everything. It kinda got to be a problem sometimes when it would knock out Pokemon that I was trying to catch. I was always waiting for Flamongus to evolve, but it never did, and honestly, it never needed to. After that detour to the south, it was time to truly begin the treasure hunt. And pretty shortly after it began, I got to see my Wave Rider evolve into a Quaxwell. At this point in the journey, I met up with my friend Grant, and we started exploring the western route through the region. We looked around, we caught some Pokemon, we both took on the Cortando gym, and then we got ready for the road ahead of us. We just had to go uphill to be on the path to the next town. Instead, we basically spent the next few hours exploring every corner of the nearby area and never going up that road. It was basically the equivalent of those anime episodes, you know, the filler ones where they, would take forever to go from one town to another even though the route was incredibly short. Yeah, it was like that. During all of this wandering about, we set up camp and tried making some sandwiches, which, by the way, That might have been my favorite aspect of this whole game. I made it my personal goal to make as many terrible sandwiches as I could on the journey, using bad mixes of ingredients, piling everything on one side of the bread, not putting on the top half of the bread, just making it as bad as possible. They're supposed to give you like these boosts or whatever, but forget that, I'm making a giant cheese sandwich with one slice of cheese. After one of these sandwich breaks, I found an egg in the basket, and shortly afterwards it hatched. It was a Sprigatito, the starter Pokemon my friend was using. It's funny, going into this journey, I had no intention of picking the cat. But I wanted a grass type, so I nicknamed it Rootaloot and let it join the team. It had a lot of catching up to do, but I wanted to see what it was capable of and what it would evolve into. But before that, LeChungus evolved into Oinkalone. It may not have been the absolute unit that it once was, but I still love this goofy pig all the same. That said, it left the team pretty much immediately afterwards. I didn't need a normal type on the team, and this was its final evolution. It did get one last time to shine, however. While we were exploring everything but the path forward, there was this small pond, and near it was a wild Arcanine. I've always wanted to use one, but catching it was a challenge. This thing outleveled my team by a lot. LeChungus' final major battle was being the tank that helped keep me in the fight. It was a trial, but finally I caught this Arcanine and named it King. After exploring pretty much everything we could at the bottom of the hill, we finally went up the road. But our paths diverged here. I slid down the ledges and explored what I could find. I looked around some caves, and during my time in the dark, Rootaloot evolved into a Florigato. This cat was struggling to keep up, and honestly, the evolution didn't really help much, but I was determined to see it through to its final form. But on the subject of determination, a real challenge was waiting for me nearby. I finished exploring the caves, the nearby cliffs, and eventually I made my way down to the waterfront, because I saw something glowing out in the water. It was a freaking Dragonair, just out in the open! One with a Thunder Terra type, too! Getting a Pokeball out there was a challenge, but once it got close enough to the shore, it was time for a battle. And it was level 54! I thought I was screwed. Like, normally I can just toss some Pokeballs out and hope one of them works, but with it being a wild Terra Pokemon, I had to weaken it first, and my team was nowhere near strong enough. In the midst of all this, I sent out Foto. This little guy was only level 21 at the time, but it was the only thing that could consistently damage it without getting destroyed by thunder. The battle was long, but eventually, Foto wore it down, and I finally caught my Dragonair. I nicknamed her Mighty Thor. She never really got to be an active part of the team due to the massive level gap, but catching Mighty Thor with only a single gym badge? That was such a good moment, dude. That was one of the coolest parts of this whole adventure. Afterwards, I took down my first Titan, a Bombardier in West Province Area 1. Then I took on the nearby Team Star base as I was making my way to the second gym, the Water Gym in Cascarafa. And after his big triumph against Mighty Thor, Foto kinda reached the end of his journey. He had his last real hurrah after the second Titan, Iron Treads, and he evolved after that battle. He stuck around a bit longer, but ultimately, I ended up needing other types on the team more than Fairy. He's still a good boy, but the team needed to continue evolving. Shortly after the second Titan fight, I met up with my friends Juker and Lonely, and we made our way from Cascarafa to Porto Marinada to complete the Water Gym Challenge. During my time by the waterfront, Wave Rider evolved into her final, fabulous form. This duck can dance, and it's so ridiculous. I love it. Great final evolution. While I was by the waterfront, I also caught a Wattrel and a Kilowattrel. I ended up using the latter and nicknaming it Kilowillow. Rootaloot was still struggling, and I wanted a backup for the Water Gym. It ended up replacing Mighty Thor, since this was a Pokemon that would, actually listen to me in battle. But it never really got a chance to shine, not even in the gym battle. Rootaloot ended up being the key to beating that gym, unsurprisingly. But it was still struggling with its stats. That, however, was about to change. With another gym badge in tow, Juker and I made it a challenge to scale the cliffs near Cascarafa, rather than making our way through the desert to get to the next town. With some well-timed jumps, we climbed up the ledges and made our way to Medali. As we were getting ready to face the next gym leader, Rootaloot evolved into its final form, and look, as someone who's a big fan of the Dark Magician archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh!, there was no way this thing was ever leaving the party. I mean, look at it! It's awesome! This final evolution proved to be the boost it needed, too. It was finally going to keep up with the rest of my team. While I was taking on the battles in town, Juker had gone on ahead to face the most ferocious gym leader of them all, the absolute legend. I'm of course talking about Larry. What an amazing gym leader. Like, who would have thought that going into this, my favorite gym leader would have been the most boring one? Juker struggled in the fight against him, but when I took him on, my Magician Cat finally got a chance to shine, pretty much one-shotting all of Larry's Pokémon. After leaving Medali, I took a bit of a detour to Casseroya Lake. I had already gotten a glimpse of how high level the Pokémon there were, but I wanted to see what kinds of Pokémon were hiding there. I found a bunch of Slowpoke and got ambushed by a giant Dondozo in the lake itself. I managed to catch it, but that fight really clued me in that maybe this wasn't the place to be. And just like Mighty Thor, Dondozo was way too high level to listen to me. So I booked it back to Medali, and this time I started working my way up to the Dalizappa Passage. At this point, I knew I wasn't ready to scale the mountain, so instead I planned to go down the eastern half of Paldea. On my way up and through the pass, I caught a few Pokemon that would join my team. First up was a Scovillain that I nicknamed Ghost Pepper. I had run into its pre-evolved form so many times. Like, they're so tiny and they're everywhere. But I had never put together that the two were related until I saw it registered in the Pokedex. I thought its unique type would be useful, but since I already had a grass type and other options for fire moves, it never really got a day in the spotlight. On the flip side is the other major catch I had in the area, Frigibax. I found this little gremlin while I was exploring the pass through the mountain. At first it had a similar role to Ghost Pepper, where it sat in the background while the rest of my team battled, but that's about where the similarities end. It evolved pretty quickly, and with its unique typing, it very quickly found a place on my team. After this point, my team was pretty consistent for a while. Wave Rider, Rootaloot, Flamongus, Kilowillow, Ghost Pepper, and Friga. As I explored the eastern part of the region, these 6 were by my side. We took down the next Team Star captain, Atticus, and made our way into the desert. There we took down the Steel Titan. Unfortunately, I don't mean the Steel Titan from Live Alive, rather it was just a really big Earthworm. But that win gave us the ability to, as Samurai Jack would say, jump good. Then we made our way down to Levincia and took down the next gym leader, the influencer Iono. Remember to like and subscribe or whatever. Oh, and remember to check out my live streams over on Twitch! At this point, it was becoming clear that as I worked my way back south, the opponents were going to get easier, not tougher. Which meant it was time to start mixing things up. I should experiment with adding new Pokemon to the team without worrying about them being underleveled. First up was Scoot, my Paldean Tauros. Admittedly, I was hoping to find a Blaze or Aqua breed, but the one I found was a Thunder Terra, so it still had some versatility. Once this guy joined the team, I really focused on training him for a bit, getting him up to par with the rest of my group. Together, we took down Team Star's Fire Crew. Well, actually, it was Wave Rider that soloed that whole base, but still. I also brought in a catch from a raid battle, the Fire Terra Zorua. This little trickster would go on to be one of the stars of my team. We burned our way through the Grass-type gym with ease. From what I've heard, it sounds like most people took on this gym first, but for me it was the 5th. With another gym completed, I decided to put Miraidon's new jumping skills to the test as we explored the canyons of South Province Area 3. Going through here earlier in the adventure would have been a lot more challenging, but instead we got to take the high road. In the midst of all this, we took on our 4th Titan and unlocked Miraidon's ability to dash. After that, I traveled to a nearby marsh upon hearing that there was an outbreak of Psyducks. I'd been hearing about all sorts of shiny Pokemon that my friends had caught, but I had yet to find one myself. I looked around, battling dozens upon dozens of Psyducks, but none appeared. So I took a break and made some authentic Paldean mac and cheese. As we finished the food and got ready to leave, I happened upon the next member of our team. A little whooper I nicknamed Whopper. And it was a shiny! It was a bit hard to tell before I caught it, because the shiny Paldean Whooper looks very similar to the regular one from Johto. Still, After all this time, I finally had a shiny to call my own. A little bit after leaving the area, Whopper evolved into a shiny Clodsire. We worked our way back to Los Platos, then returned to Mesa Goza for the first time since the treasure hunt began. We'd completed our first loop around the region, and now it was time to go even further. This last bit of my journey is much more disjointed, seeing as I had explored so much of the region already. During my visit to Mesa Goza, I stopped by the school and took some lessons from Hassel, the art teacher. I learned a lot about the region through the visit, but I also learned that Hassel is just a great character. Honestly, I wish I had spent more time during my adventure taking lessons at the school. I ignored it for so long because I expected it to be the usual basic stuff, and yeah, some of it is. But there's a lot of fun moments to be had there. After this, I explored the cliffs in the southwest of the region, the area I had snuck over to originally. This time, I had stronger Pokémon and better movement, so I really got to explore. Then, remembering where I had found Mighty Thor earlier, I went down to the waterfront and followed the cliffs into Alfornata Cavern. I explored the caves, then worked my way up to the town and took on Tulip, the next gym leader. Afterwards, I climbed further up the mountains and had this fun moment with some Psyducks, with them posing together with me. We made an amazing team, even if they weren't actually part of the team. That was fun, but then I got into a bit of trouble. I kept exploring the cliffs with Miraidon, and ended up accidentally climbing the cliff to where the Pokémon League is. Oops. I technically could have visited here much earlier, but I found that out later. Curious what would happen, I went up to the entrance and got brought in for an interview, and couldn't back out. I got really worried for a second that I'd have to fight the Elite Four early, and I was not prepared for that. But thankfully, Rika rejected my answers. I was told I wouldn't be taken seriously without 8 badges, so it was time to continue the journey. I'd be back here soon enough. Continuing our loop around the outer ring of the region, we returned to Castle Royal Lake to take on the last of the Titans. After all this time, my new Pokémon were caught up, and my old ones were at the perfect level for these challenges. And as we explored the areas around the lake, such as the waterfalls nearby, Friga evolved into a Baxcalibur. I had my own little Godzilla on the team, and that was awesome! At this point, I thought my team was pretty much complete, and Miraidon's abilities had reached their peak. Speaking of which, after exploring the area around the lake and getting near the mountain again, I took another detour. I hopped in a flying taxi over to Artisan to meet up with Juker. During this time, we made it a point to try and make the worst sandwiches we possibly could. He was streaming some absolutely terrible, bottom-of-the-barrel games, and I use the word game very loosely here. Like, if you've heard of Animal Soccer World, it's that kind of stuff. Anyways, we tried to theme the sandwiches to the games. We made the Detective Mouse, the Atlantis, Lost Condiments, and the 7 Clever Ingredients, which led to the most epic part of my Pokemon journey. Literally making a grocery run to get ingredients for our sandwiches. I went back to Levincia legitimately just to go buy food. During this session, we explored the cliffs of Eastern Paldea, and I decided to explore the edge of the region. Working my way further and further northeast, eventually I had a bit of a repeat of an earlier situation. A Wild Terra, but this time it wasn't a Dragonair. It was a level 75 Steel Terra Dragonite. I didn't expect to find anything nearly this strong. I thought I was done with challenges like this after braving the Castle Royal Lake, but after an absolute struggle of a battle, I wasn't gonna give up. And once again, I caught it. Sword Edge may not have joined the team, but it was such a memorable encounter. I'm always caught off guard when I encounter fully evolved Pokemon like that in the wild. After this, I returned to the mountains, took down the Fairy Team Starbase, and then took on the last 2 gym leaders, Gresha and Rhyme. Heading down the mountain, I saw that another outbreak was occurring nearby, so I traveled over to catch some Charcadets. I thought about looking for a shiny in all of this, but shiny Charcadets are very, very hard to identify. The literal only difference is the color of the eye flames. Trying to find one is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Then I found one. I actually found one. As with Whopper, I decided to bring Charcadet onto the team. From there, I made another detour back to Alfornata, followed by Zapapico. I needed to get some items to trade so I could evolve Wonder Blue into a Ceruledge. With our final member of the team in tow, we traveled over to the northeast for the final team starbase. From there, I made the final stops of our journey. I went back to Mesa Goza to finish off Team Star, I met up with Arvin one more time to make some plans, and returned to the Pokemon League and earned the title of Champion. My journey in Paldea continued after that, but I don't want to spoil the endgame for people who haven't played it. I will say my final team was Wave Rider, Whopper, Wonder Blue, Rudaloot, Firefox, and Friga, though there was one more substitute member added much later. Long after the end of my journey, I teamed up with some friends for one heck of a raid battle to catch one of my favorite Pokemon, Greninja. The battle against a powerful Poison Terror Greninja was brutal, and I needed some help to train Whopper to match up against it. But after a number of attempts, I caught it, adding KUNAI to the party. Technically its full nickname should be KUNAI with Chain, but KUNAI is all that would fit in the game. I didn't expect to have another edition like that, but I'm sure things will change up even more over time, just like it did throughout my journey. And what a journey it was! I've been playing Pokemon since I was a kid, for as long as I can remember, honestly. And having an open world adventure where I could choose my own path to take, it was such a breath of fresh air. Meeting up with friends, camping, getting sidetracked, it felt like getting to experience the adventure I used to watch in the anime every week. The characters you meet on this adventure were so fun. Penny's got a good design and I like her story well enough, but the real stars of the game for me were Arvin and Nemona. I expected Arvin to be the jerk rival early on, but instead he just ended up being one of the best characters. Like, not just in this game, but in the series. He's so good, and I was really invested in the story of this dude and his dog. Plus, he's a fellow sandwich connoisseur. I was also pleasantly surprised with Nemona as a rival. In recent generations, I haven't been a fan of the rivals being pushovers that you just beat down over and over. The worst of it was in Gen 6, where you just watch Calum or Serena's self-confidence get shattered over the course of the adventure. It made winning feel bad. Having Nemona be a champion from the start, that's raising a second team just to take you on, it helps to avoid that issue. To me, it almost comes off as patronizing. And I appreciate some of the depth they gave her later on, that helps you understand why she's so excited to have a rival. It also helps that because of how I handled my team in the second half of the game, the final rival battle with her was a genuine challenge, something I'm really not used to seeing in these games anymore. In fact, a lot of the endgame stuff was challenging. Maybe it wouldn't have been so tough if I had just stuck with one team and bulldozed everything, but that's not the experience I had. And on the subject of experiences I didn't have, I'm not here to talk about the game's performance issues. They exist, but I never had any wild glitches or anything, and the issues I did have never got in the way of my experience. If you watched this video hoping to hear me rant about how broken the game is or whatever, well, you probably didn't watch this late into the video anyways, but also, that's not what this channel is about. I don't get any joy from ranting about stuff I don't like. It doesn't make me happy. There's so many other channels you could go to for that. I prefer to focus on the stuff I enjoy, and honestly, despite everything, I was shocked by just how much I enjoyed Pokemon Violet. And this is without getting into the endgame, which is by far the best part of the game. This is the most I've enjoyed a mainline Pokemon game since Gen 5, and I can't believe I'm saying that. Does it pass Gen 5 for me? Hard to say. It'll really depend on what the game is like after all the updates and DLC, but what I do know is that it's an experience I'm glad I had, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to the Toon Crew over on Patreon, including Gold Ligting, Bagnall, The Maniacal Gamer, A. Scott, Bubba S. Walter, Gabriel Garcia, Gerard F.A., Gutang Clan, Infinite Scratch, Jacob Tucker, Ray Bowie, Ryan T, and Silver Mike. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time for more art. Later!